Hello around the world, and particularly to our friends in the ISWA World Congress 2022 in Singapore. I would have loved to be there in person, but it hasn't been possible this time. So we're sharing today these exciting results with you in the ISWA Marine Litter Task Force session through this video. I'm Dr. Kostas Vallis, academic at the University of Leeds and leader of the Marine Litter Task Force. Today, in this presentation, we're going to be sharing the results of applying the ISWA plastic pollution calculator to the city of Rotterdam. This is a teamwork. We had Dr. Joshua Cotton and Mr. Ed Cook from University of Leeds, my research team, working very hard on these results. And we had the excellent input also of Nina Carlson and Håkan Redlander, who really helped with a wider setting the scene on the plastic pollution and the waste management performance of the city of Rotterdam. Gunilla and Håkan, you know them very well already, so I don't think they need any special introduction. So without further delay, I'm going ahead with the content of our presentation today. So for those who are not really familiar with the ISWA plastic pollution calculator, the calculator is a comprehensive tool for quantifying plastics pollution at a city or a provincial level. It is designed and operated by the University of Leeds, and the calculator is capable of describing sources, pathways, fates of plastic pollution across all global realities, from informal settlements through to downtown city districts with state-of-the-art waste management, as is the case of Rotterdam, which will be the focus of our presentation. It achieves that by taking a detailed look at the waste management infrastructure, practices and behaviors at a specific location. So when you're trying to address plastic pollution and understand it, you might feel totally overwhelmed. There are so many different aspects that mean playing a role, and we have visualized some of those here, from land use to geography to climate to infrastructure to services, formal and informal, and so on. How then you go about quantifying plastics pollution? It can be really daunting. So the plastic pollution calculator uses a comprehensive conceptual model to framework the interlinks between those factors, and not only quantify the amount of leakage of plastic into the environment, but also provide a causality behind why plastic leaked in the first place. All this is built on top of a material flow analysis structure that enables the flows of plastic waste to be mapped from their point of generation through the waste management system and into the environment. Crucially, by understanding the reasons behind leakage, interventions can be prioritized and targeted at the point of the system that will be most effective. This information is combined with other significant learnings provided by the calculator, such as waste generation and composition by detailed sectors, or the progress of a city towards a circular economy, and enables us a detailed action plan to be developed onwards based on the findings of the calculator. This has been showcased quite recently into other cities here in Southeast Asia, for example in Da Nang, in Angkor Tamarat, and Surabaya and Kuala Lumpur, in a recently completed major project for the United Nations ASCAP, Closing the Loop. And you're very welcome to go online and access the relative reports. So, in the case of Rotterdam, Marine Litter Task Force have been fortunate enough to apply the plastic pollution calculator across the city with the aid of City of Rotterdam, Circular Rotterdam and VRD funding, and we're really grateful to them. Overall, the calculator was applied into 13 districts within the city in order to incorporate the local waste management, socioeconomic and demographic and land uses, and the variations thereof, and assess how these contribute towards plastic pollution. For example, as you can see, how the population changes by district and their proximities to water. 85% of the population in Rotterdam are within 1 kilometer of a river or canal. As well, how the land use changes, both in terms of commercial and institutional activities. We have considered that as well. So, we're really delighted to be able to present this case study today, because the majority of the work that has been done so far in the plastic pollution came from really areas of basic or failing waste management systems. In contrast, the waste management in Rotterdam is some of the most sophisticated in the world. For instance, residents are provided with over 300,000 cubic meters of containers for self-separating recyclables, in addition to 40,000 cubic meters for residual waste and over 6,000 state-of-the-art high-volume underground bins, which are also in use, and many of which are equipped with remote sensing technology to aid optimized collection, scheduling, and ensure efficient emptying. All this is so fantastic, isn't it? But that being said, no system is perfect, and Rotterdam has its own challenges. For instance, when systems are failing, it might be really easier to identify the main sources of the plastic pollution, isn't it? But however, in a city such as Rotterdam, and when plastic in the environment is likely to be few and far between, identifying and tackling these sources in order to become zero plastic pollution can be a difficult task, but one we hope the calculator can help address. The case study of Rotterdam is therefore very important in its ability to demonstrate and provide evidence base really for how both the magnitude and the particular sources of plastic pollution may change when we have to deal with a sophisticated, well-functioning waste management system that is implemented, and as it is here in a city with very high aspirations on circular economy. And you can see some small examples of uncollected litter that demonstrate some of the smaller type of challenges that Rotterdam might be facing. I will now hand over to my colleague from University of Leeds, Dr. Joshua Cotton, and Josh is going to go through a series of more detailed information, essentially our findings in the report. Josh, over to you.
Thank you. So the first step of the calculator was to visually represent the flows of waste throughout Rotterdam's waste management system, and we did this by performing material flow analysis. Here the size of the arrows correspond to the mass in each flow. We can see that around 53% of all municipal solid waste is collected or reclaimed for recycling, with the remainder almost entirely going to incineration with energy recovery. Interestingly, plastic packaging and food and drink cartons are no longer separately collected in Rotterdam following the successful implementation of an automated system which recovers them from the residual waste prior to incineration. The potential for litter in the environment is also substantially reduced due to the provision of over 9,500 litter collection containers, in addition to some of the most advanced mechanical and manual street sweeping operations in the world. So what did we find? Well, firstly, approximately 387,000 tonnes of municipal solid waste is generated in Rotterdam each year, equivalent to about 1.68 kilograms per resident per day. As expected, districts with higher populations tended to generate the largest absolute amounts, with the exception, however, of the centrum districts, which generated relatively more in comparison to the population due to the large commercial and institutional presence there. The proportion of plastic in the waste was also seen to differ by district based on the land use and activities occurring, but in general this varied from between 14 to 11%, giving in total 47,500 tonnes of plastic waste generation. As can be seen in the figure on the right, 2/3 of plastic waste generation came from residential sources, whereas if we dig a little deeper into the remaining sources, breaking them down by detailed sectors, we can see that offices, retail, and the transportation and storage sectors are some of those responsible for the largest amounts of waste generation. The calculator is unique in not only looking at the sectors responsible for plastic waste generation, but also using the plastic item composition of each of these sectors to determine the plastic items that are likely to be generated in the largest amounts. This is important as the ability for an item to leak into the environment often depends on many intrinsic characteristics, such as its value, its physical properties like shape and size, and the context of its use, for example, if it's used on the go or not. Additionally, by understanding the item composition and potentially troublesome items, interventions can be addressed to target these specifically. As can be seen here, pot stubs and trays, plastic film, carry bags and drink bowls are some of the items which are predicted to be generated as the most amount of waste in Rotterdam. In terms of plastic pollution, the calculator found that littering is by far the largest source of plastic emissions into the environment, with an estimated 6 tonnes per year going uncollected. This is followed by fly tipping and, to a lesser extent, leakage from the collection containers whilst awaiting to be collected. This is in stark contrast to the results often seen in the Global South, where uncollected waste is usually the dominant source, followed then by leakage from the collection system due to typically any containers provided being over capacity, damaged or misused. In Rotterdam, however, The state-of-the-art collection system in place, such as the previously mentioned underground containers and remote monitoring of bin capacities, means these sources of emissions are a lot less significant. That being said, emissions whilst waiting for collection are still much higher than emissions that occur after the waste has physically been collected, as represented here by the other category. This is due to the secure storage, transportation and disposal by municipal workers, as well as the strict environmental controls in place in Rotterdam. In contrast, littering and fly tipping are much harder for a municipality to control due to them being largely behavioural based, and therefore this leads to them being the dominant source. However, littering and fly tipping combined represent less than 0.02% of all plastic waste generation. As we saw in the material flow analysis, this percentage is only as low as it really is due to the substantial amount of litter bins and street sweeping collection that is in place. The benefits of running the calculator at a district level in Rotterdam before later aggregating to a city level is we can gain insights into the districts responsible for the majority of plastic emissions. As you can see here, the district of Delfshaven was calculated as having the highest amount of overall plastic emissions to the environment, with almost 2 tonnes per year being emitted. This is as a consequence of it having a high population, a high plastic waste generation rate, and perhaps most crucially, substantial amounts of littering and fly tipping. In a new module that we've added to the calculator specifically for Rotterdam, this litter and fly tipping not only takes into account the socioeconomics and land uses of the area, but it additionally calibrated based on the number of incidents of littering and fly tipping as reported to Rotterdam municipality. Whilst looking at the absolute masses can provide certain insights into potential hotspots for plastic pollution, an alternative metric is to study the per capita rate of emissions as shown here. So you can see that Delfshaven is still seen to be the highest per capita rates compared to other districts, but the relative variation is not as pronounced as before. For example, the Centrum district has the second highest per capita plastic emissions, only slightly less than that of Delfshaven, whereas on an absolute basis, it was one of the better performing districts. Following the release of plastic into the environment, the calculator uses information on the land use, the topography, the weather, item properties, and drainage infrastructure to estimate the likely pathways to water and eventual fates that this uncontrolled plastic might take. So as can be seen here in the figure on the left, the majority of plastic moves to waterways by being blown over land. This is likely the biggest route due to the high density of waterways and canals within Rotterdam, meaning the plastic doesn't have to travel far before it reaches water. Alternatively, 29% of the plastic found in waterways originated there due to direct dumping into the water, likely due to littering and leakage from water-based activities. In contrast to results often seen in the Global South, storm drains don't really play a significant role in Rotterdam in the transfer of plastic to water. Now this is based on the fact that drains are largely covered, as in they're underground, thereby severely limiting the chance of plastic entering them in the first place. The graph on the right shows the temporal element of these pathways. The seasonal fluctuations are due to changes in weather conditions. For example, increased rainfall leads to both higher emissions of plastic into the environment and an increased likelihood of transfer of plastic overland to water due to surface runoff. The narrow peaks seen are related to increased likelihood of plastic emissions into the environment at periods immediately prior to and during collection, when the chance of plastic emissions substantially increases. Of the 9 tonnes per year of uncollected plastic emissions in Rotterdam, approximately 4 tonnes is believed to become aquatic debris, with the darker blue districts contributing the most as shown here. This 4 tonnes represents only about 0.01% of plastic waste generation, which, while sounding small, is actually equivalent to many thousands of items due to the lightweight nature of the plastic. For instance, 13% of aquatic debris is calculated as being plastic bags, whereas 23% is calculated as being plastic bottles. If we assume average weights of these of about 7.5 grams and 20 grams respectively, this equates to around 75,000 plastic bags and 50,000 plastic bottles entering aquatic environments each year in Rotterdam. This therefore demonstrates that although Rotterdam is a leading example of sustainable waste management, improvements can still be made to reduce plastic pollution further. So to conclude, the application of the ISWA plastic pollution calculator to this case study of Rotterdam is incredibly important as it demonstrates for perhaps the first time the orders of magnitude improvement in plastic pollution that can be achieved with sophisticated, well-functioning waste management in place, optimised for resource recovery. Only a small proportion of plastic was calculated as becoming plastic pollution, and this is largely credited to the high containment maintained throughout the solid waste management system by the City of Rotterdam, meaning the chances of any plastic escaping are incredibly low. However, both littering and fly tipping, which are often much harder to manage and discourage, are challenging areas for all cities, including Rotterdam. Whilst their substantial street cleaning programme can reduce the impact of these significantly, they still represent major sources of plastic pollution in the city. When this is coupled with the high proximity to waterways, this leads to perhaps many thousands of plastic items entering waterways each year. In order to reduce this plastic pollution further, Rotterdam can continue to lead by example and improve their tackling of these remaining challenging plastic pollution sources of littering and fly tipping. Interventions targeting particularly troublesome single-use plastic items, such as the pot stubs and trays, the bottles and the plastic bags that we saw earlier, these could be introduced, as well as further expanding their secure underground collection containers and remote sensing capabilities. Lastly, although Rotterdam is world-leading in their transition to a circular economy, further efforts in this direction can only be beneficial in the fight against plastic pollution. I'll now hand back over to Dr. Costas Velis, who will talk you through some up-and-coming releases.
Thank you, Jos. We have now seen the core findings of applying the plastic pollution calculator in the city of Rotterdam, and I think that's exciting to see how effective is the waste management, but also to see how application of such a toolkit allows us to focus on what is really matter, what's really the challenge on a local case. That said, the report is not yet in the public domain, so we have been doing a pre-release today, and the report is going to be presented in its full glory and event planned towards December this year, so keep an eye into that area if you're interested, and let us know so that we can give you the opportunity to follow us and participate into the launch of the Plastic Pollution Calculator Rotterdam case study. That said, we have more exciting outputs aligned ahead of us, and this is a comparative report that will tell us how the different cities across the world are performing in terms of plastic pollution linking waste management to that performance. This comparative report is going to released also towards the end of 2022, and keep an eye on that area. So just to give you a small appetizer on that, assume that what is released in Rotterdam is one, okay? Is one item per year per person, okay? Now, if we go to a case study, and we did in Indonesia, this amount that is emitted, is leaking into the environment of the plastic, is almost 500 times more, 500 times. And if you go to an informal settlement, is even much more worse. We've done this informal settlement in Cairo, in Egypt, and it's almost 3,000 times more than is what is released in the city of Rotterdam, which shows you how a good waste management system is actually able to prevent tremendous amount of orders of magnitude leakage into the environment. Anyway, keep an eye on that. I'll give you also more specific numbers, and we'll be able to discuss this in great detail in the launch of the comparative report. I would really like to thank our sponsors here, all the companies and the organizations who have really funded us and made this possible, and not least, of course, again, City of Rotterdam and BRD, who have provided funding in kind, input and data to make this study possible. And thank you so much for following us today, and we look forward to have your feedback, your thoughts about the application of the plastic pollution calculator in Rotterdam and around the world. Thank you for listening.